The room fell silent. The lawyer cleared his throat, his eyes sweeping over the tense faces in the Anderson mansion. Amelia Johnson is entitled to a significant portion of Mr. Anderson's estate, he announced. Shock rippled through the opulent hall. Mrs. Anderson's face flushed with fury, her voice sharp and accusing. How dare he leave our fortune to a servant? But then a small voice cut through the outrage. 8-year-old Jimmy, trembling but resolute, spoke with courage beyond his years. She's earned it. She deserves it. You all are wrong. A maid receiving a fortune? A boy standing up to his mother? The tension, the injustice, the courage. What happens next will change everything. Before we dive into Amelia's incredible journey, make sure to hit that follow button and join the channel. You won't want to miss how the story unfolds. Amelia Johnson moved through the grand mansions of New York with a quiet, almost ghostly grace, each step measured, each gesture precise, yet entirely unremarkable to those around her. To the wealthy homeowners, she was a background figure, a shadow that ensured their lives ran smoothly, never a person to be acknowledged. Her name was rarely spoken, her presence rarely noticed, and yet in every crease of her face, in every callus upon her hands, there was a story of enduring resilience and unwavering kindness. At 36, her hands bore the marks of decades of labor, slight scars from burns and cuts, nails worn short from constant washing and scrubbing, but they also carried a softness, a tenderness reserved for the moments when she comforted an elderly neighbor or when she held a frightened child's hand. Even in the quiet of the night, the muscles in her shoulders and arms carried the tension of responsibility, yet beneath it all lay a steady rhythm of hope that refused to break. Amelia's uniform was plain and faded, the fabric fraying at the seams from years of use, yet she wore it with a quiet dignity that made it almost regal. Her shoes, scuffed and worn, barely whispered against the polished floors, and yet each step was deliberate, carrying her from room to room with the gentle certainty of someone who had learned to move without imposing upon the world around her. Her small smile was a fragile shield against the indifference she faced daily, a light in a life that often felt steeped in shadows. She had grown up in a neighborhood that the city seemed to have forgotten, a place of crumbling brick and uneven sidewalks, where poverty was not just a circumstance but a lingering presence, shaping every hope and dream. Losing her parents at a young age had left her untethered, her family name lost to the winds of circumstance, and yet she found purpose in the quiet ways she could make life better for others. Evenings found her in her modest apartment, a space too small for grandeur, but filled with the warmth of memories and small acts of care. She would light a single candle on the windowsill, its flame flickering like a heartbeat, and set to the task of preparing simple meals, folding clothes, or mending worn shoes. On nights when exhaustion pressed down on her chest like a physical weight, she would sit by the window and listen to the city outside, a symphony of distant horns, barking dogs, and the faint laughter of families gathering for dinner. In those moments, she allowed herself to breathe, to remember her mother's voice, soft but firm. They can silence your voice, but never take your dignity. The words were a mantra, a compass guiding her through the endless days of servitude and invisibility. Amelia's life had always been a delicate balance between endurance and tenderness. She volunteered at the local church, not out of obligation, but from a genuine desire to ease the burdens of others. She shared what little she had with neighbors who had even less, carrying bags of groceries up narrow staircases, listening patiently to stories of heartbreak, and offering comfort with a quiet, unwavering presence. Children would sometimes shyly follow her, drawn by the gentle way she laughed at their clumsy jokes or the warmth in her eyes that seemed to say, "You are seen. You matter." These small connections, fragile yet profound, were the threads that held her spirit together, giving her a sense of belonging she never felt in the opulent mansions she served. And yet, invisibility carried a sting that wealth and kindness could not erase. The constant erasure of her presence, the curt nods from employers, the way her opinions were dismissed before they were even spoken, etched into her soul a quiet loneliness. It was a loneliness not merely of body, but of spirit, a persistent ache that whispered in moments of solitude, "Do you matter? Do you belong?" But Amelia refused to yield to despair. Her dignity, cultivated through years of struggle, remained intact, a beacon she clung to in the face of disregard. One cold morning, as she polished the marble floors of the Harrington estate, her thoughts drifted to the children she helped tutor in the evenings, to the neighbor she had nursed through a harsh winter of illness, to the small library she dreamed of restoring in her neighborhood. She imagined faces lighting up with joy, the laughter of children spilling through quiet streets, the warmth of community strengthened by simple acts of care. In those fleeting moments, the weight of the mansion, its grandeur, and its cold indifference seemed to fade, replaced by a vision of a life where purpose mattered more than appearance, where love and dignity were currency far more valuable than gold. Even as the world ignored her, Amelia's heart beat with a quiet insistence that her life could matter beyond the walls of servitude. And somewhere, in the corners of her reality where wealth and prejudice intersected, a small, observant pair of eyes, belonging to a child of privilege, who had begun to notice her despite the world's insistence on erasure, watch her every movement. It was in these unnoticed, tender moments that the seeds of change were planted, though neither Amelia nor the child yet understood the extraordinary ways their lives would intertwine. For Amelia, the invisible struggle was not a source of shame, but a testament to endurance. Every act of service, every quiet sacrifice, every smile in the face of disregard was a defiance of a world determined to overlook her. And as she finished her tasks for the morning, smoothing the hem of her uniform and letting her gaze linger for a moment on the grand chandeliers above, she whispered softly to herself, "I am here. I am worthy. I will not be invisible." It was a promise, a quiet declaration, and in that moment, though no one may have seen her, Amelia's spirit shone with a quiet, unassailable light. The Anderson mansion gleamed with wealth, every surface polished to perfection, every chandelier casting prisms of light across the expansive halls. To an outsider, it was a palace of order and luxury, yet beneath the shine and grandeur, there thrived a world of quiet cruelty that few noticed and fewer endured with dignity. Amelia Johnson moved within this opulent cage like a careful shadow, her hands steady despite the invisible weight of scrutiny pressing upon her. Each step she took was a balancing act between efficiency and invisibility, an effort to complete her duties flawlessly while avoiding the sharp eyes of Mrs. Anderson, the mansion's matriarch and master of subtle cruelty. Mrs. Anderson had a voice that could cut through glass, a presence that made every action of those below her status feel inadequate. She walked through her home with a sense of entitlement that demanded perfection from everyone in sight, and no mistake went unnoticed. Amelia had long learned to anticipate this, yet even the most experienced maid cannot escape human fallibility. On the night of the grand party, the mansion thrummed with the voices of the city's elite, laughter, music, the clinking of crystal glasses, and Amelia moved silently among them, carrying a silver tray heavy with glasses of champagne. Her arms, though strong, trembled slightly with the weight, a subtle quiver only noticeable to those truly watching. Then it happened. A glass slipped, shattering against the marble floor, sending a cascade of crystal shards across the polished surface. Time seemed to stretch, each second magnifying the humiliation. The guests' laughter twisted cruelly, a chorus of judgment that pressed against Amelia's chest. Her cheeks burned, a heat that spread from her ears to her neck, and a wave of shame threatened to overwhelm her. Mrs. Anderson's voice cut through the room like a whip. Even the simplest tasks are too much for her. The words reverberated through Amelia's body, embedding themselves in her chest like stones. She bent to gather the pieces, fingers shaking, heart pounding with a mix of fear, frustration, and quiet despair. Amelia swallowed hard, forcing down tears that threatened to betray her composure. She repeated her mother's mantra silently. "They can silence your voice, but never take your dignity." It was all she had, and it was enough to keep her upright, even as the sting of humiliation threatened to topple her. Every movement she made, every glass she retrieved, was a testament to the strength forged in years of struggle and invisible labor. Even when Mrs. Anderson's sharp eyes lingered on her mistakes, Amelia did not falter entirely. She bent, she cleaned, she continued, and she survived another round in a world that seemed determined to belittle her existence. In a quiet corner of the glittering hall, hidden behind a massive bouquet of flowers, a small pair of eyes observed. Jimmy, the Andersons' 8-year-old son, watched with an intensity beyond his years. He did not yet have the words to fully understand the injustice of what he was witnessing, yet his young heart registered it, the shame pressing down on Amelia, the cold cruelty of his mother's words, the invisible weight she carried with such grace. A seed of empathy began to grow in him, tentative and fragile, yet undeniable. He wanted to speak, to intervene, yet fear held him captive. For now, he remained a silent witness, the first spark of awareness flickering in a world that had long taught him to value wealth over humanity. After the guests had gone, leaving the mansion echoing with silence, Amelia retreated to the servants' quarters, a small space far removed from the chandeliers and polished floors. She allowed herself a moment to exhale, to release the tension that had coiled in her body for hours. Clara, another maid and confidant, approached quietly, offering a sympathetic smile. "You did fine tonight," she whispered, her voice low, carrying a mixture of admiration and sorrow. Amelia nodded, the gesture almost imperceptible, but the acknowledgement of shared struggle warmed her spirit. In that small, dimly lit room, the grandeur of the mansion outside faded, replaced by a fragile human connection that reminded her she was not entirely alone. Later, as Amelia walked home through the quiet streets of her neighborhood, the weight of the evening slowly lifted. The city smelled of wet asphalt and faintly of bread from the corner bakery. Children played in puddles, their laughter raw and unrefined, a stark contrast to the hollow laughter she had endured in the mansion. Here, in the narrow alleyways and crumbling buildings, she found warmth and belonging, a sharp contrast to the cold scrutiny of the elite. Each familiar face, Clara, the elders she assisted, neighbors who waved as she passed, was a balm for her weary spirit. She carried not only groceries or mended clothes, but the fragile hope that kindness could still matter in a world that often seemed blind to it. Even as humiliation had marked her in the grand halls of the Andersons, Amelia recognized that her dignity remained untouched. The mansion could judge, sneer, and belittle, but it could not strip her of the quiet strength cultivated through years of endurance. In the reflective surface of a shop window, she caught her own gaze, noting the weariness etched into her features, but also the steadiness in her eyes, the subtle lift of her chin that spoke of resilience. Somewhere deep inside, a spark remained, a spark that refused to be extinguished by wealth, arrogance, or neglect. That night, Amelia whispered into the darkness of her small apartment, "I am more than what they see. I am more than the mistakes they highlight. I am worthy, and my heart will not be broken by their judgment." The words, though softly spoken, carried the weight of a promise to herself. She would endure. She would remain compassionate. She would continue to see the humanity in the world that others ignored. And somewhere, in the quiet, observant eyes of a young boy growing in understanding, the first thread of a profound connection was being woven, one that neither time nor circumstance could easily sever. After long hours in the cold, polished halls of the Anderson mansion, Amelia Johnson returned to the narrow streets and crumbling buildings of her neighborhood, a world entirely removed from the chandeliers, marble, and whispered judgment she had endured. Here, the air smelled of rain-soaked earth, faint smoke from cooking fires, and the quiet resilience of those who had learned to survive without privilege. The weight of humiliation she carried from the mansion lifted gradually with each familiar step, replaced by the soft embrace of community, laughter, and human connection that money could never buy. Amelia's small apartment, modest and unadorned, felt like a haven compared to the mansion, not because it was luxurious, but because it held the warmth of belonging. Clara, her neighbor and a single mother with eyes tired from years of struggle, welcomed her with a smile that bore the marks of resilience. "Long day," she asked softly, handing Amelia a plate with 2 slices of bread and a thin soup, enough to share. Their conversations were often simple, yet profound, filled with shared dreams, whispered fears, and the understanding that in this modest world, dignity could not be bought but was fiercely earned. Evenings were spent moving from one small act of care to another. Amelia helped elders carry groceries up narrow staircases, her strong hands steady despite their own aches. She mended torn clothing for children whose laughter masked hardship, listening patiently as they spoke of dreams larger than their circumstances allowed. Each stitch she sewed, each errand she ran, was a quiet rebellion against a world that had long taught her invisibility. She carried the weight of her community in her heart, feeling its burdens as acutely as her own. The children were perhaps the most vivid testament to the beauty hidden in hardship. They ran barefoot through alleys, voices loud and untamed, their eyes wide with curiosity and hunger, for knowledge, for stories, for a world beyond the cracked sidewalks. Amelia tutored them when she could, teaching lessons that went beyond math or reading. She taught hope, patience, and the courage to dream. In their eager faces, she saw reflections of her own childhood, moments of loss transformed into quiet strength, lessons learned in the crucible of poverty. Meanwhile, far removed from these streets, young Jimmy Anderson began to notice the emptiness in his own life. His home, though filled with material wealth, was devoid of warmth, honesty, and genuine human connection. The laughter he heard in his gilded halls felt hollow, a performance rather than expression. He compared it silently to the quiet strength of the maid his mother scorned, the way she carried herself under scrutiny, the way she moved with care, dignity, and attention to the smallest details of others' lives. Though he did not yet understand the depth of her struggles, he sensed the authenticity in Amelia's actions, a stark contrast to the calculated smiles and shallow kindness he witnessed daily. One afternoon, Jimmy followed her quietly, hiding behind the familiar brick walls of the neighborhood. He watched as Amelia handed a warm blanket to an elderly man, and his small heart stirred with an unfamiliar sensation, admiration. The way she spoke to the children, patiently explaining a difficult lesson and listening to their endless questions, left them awed. Her laughter, soft and musical, did not need approval. It was a gift freely given, and it illuminated the dusty streets in ways his world of wealth never could. A seed of understanding began to grow, tentative yet persistent, in a boy accustomed to opulence yet starved for genuine humanity. Amelia, unaware of the young observer, continued her nightly rounds of kindness. She visited a struggling family whose youngest child had been sick, holding a bowl of soup in her hands as she knelt to meet the child's tear-streaked face. "You'll feel better soon," she whispered, her voice steady despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. The child's small hand reached for hers, gripping tightly, and in that fleeting contact, Amelia felt a surge of warmth, a reminder that her life's labor, though unseen by the rich and powerful, mattered profoundly. In these moments, the stark contrast between the mansion and her neighborhood became ever clearer. Wealth had provided comfort and security for the Andersons, yet it could not teach empathy, resilience, or the strength born of shared struggle. Amelia's community, poor and often overlooked by the world, offered richness in the form of human connection, loyalty, and an unbreakable spirit. Each smile she received, each word of gratitude, each small victory in someone's life, reinforced her belief in the power of dignity and service. By the time night fell and Amelia returned to her modest apartment, her heart carried the quiet satisfaction of a day spent sowing hope. The world outside remained indifferent, but here, in these narrow streets and humble homes, she had nurtured life, growth, and the fragile sparks of possibility. She lit a single candle in her apartment, its soft flame flickering against the darkness, and allowed herself a moment to reflect. Her thoughts wandered to the boy in the mansion, Jimmy, and she wondered, briefly, if he would ever understand the depth of a life led with purpose beyond wealth. Perhaps he would, perhaps he wouldn't. For now she had her community, and that was enough. Before sleep claimed her, Amelia whispered to herself, a quiet echo of resilience carried over decades of struggle. "I may walk unseen in their world, but here I am seen. I may carry burdens they cannot imagine, yet I am strong. My life, my actions, my heart, they are enough." In that declaration she found solace, a sense of belonging that transcended the opulent walls she had left behind, and an understanding that the bonds forged in adversity could be more powerful than any inheritance or title. Somewhere, in a world divided by wealth and status, the first invisible threads of connection were weaving together. Two lives, worlds apart, slowly bending toward one another, destined to meet in a way neither could yet imagine. The Anderson mansion, usually alive with the rhythm of daily opulence, was suddenly subdued, draped in a shadow that no crystal chandelier could pierce. The news of Mr. Anderson's sudden passing had struck the household like a violent storm, leaving echoes of disbelief, grief, and fear in its wake. Amelia Johnson, who had spent decades serving this family with quiet diligence and unwavering care, felt an unfamiliar weight pressing against her chest. She did not know whether it was sorrow for a life extinguished too soon or the anxious anticipation of what might follow in the wake of the patriarch's absence. Her mind wandered, unbidden, to the many times she had nursed Mrs. Anderson's mother, the matriarch whom she had cared for with gentle hands and unwavering attention. She had never expected reward or recognition, only the satisfaction of knowing she had served with integrity. The reading of the will, an event normally anticipated with formal decorum, erupted into chaos almost immediately. Amelia, standing quietly at the periphery of the grand room, felt her pulse quicken as the lawyer's voice, steady yet deliberate, recited the contents. And then it came, a declaration that seemed to suspend reality itself. A significant portion of Mr. Anderson's estate, a sum that could have changed any life overnight, was to be left to her. A hush fell over the room, sharp and sudden, cutting through the murmurs of shock and disbelief. Eyes turned toward Amelia, a mixture of incredulity, suspicion, and fury igniting in the faces of those who had long considered her invisible, beneath them, unworthy. Mrs. Anderson's reaction was immediate and fierce. Her face, already painted with the arrogance of entitlement, twisted into an expression of unbridled rage. "How dare he give our fortune to a servant?" she shouted, her voice echoing off the marble walls, a weapon as sharp as any blade. Accusations and whispers flew through the room like poisoned arrows. Manipulation, betrayal, deceit. Each word, each insinuation, struck Amelia with the force of 1,000 unseen blows. She felt her knees weaken, her chest constrict, the world tilting precariously around her. But even in that maelstrom of hatred and disbelief, she did not falter completely. Amelia's gaze fell upon a memory of her mother, whose words had always been her anchor. "They can silence your voice, but never take your dignity." She drew a deep breath, letting the mantra anchor her in the storm. Her hands, which had tended to broken lives with care and patience, were steady. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but unwavering. She did not speak to defend herself from accusations. She did not argue to justify her worth. She simply stood, a living testament to honesty, humility, and integrity. In that charged moment, small but resolute, Jimmy Anderson, the 8-year-old observer of countless unacknowledged acts of kindness, stepped forward. His young voice, fragile yet determined, cut through the chaos like a beam of light. "My father trusted her more than all of you. He knew her heart." There was a tremor in his words, a quiver born of youth and awe, but also an authority that could not be ignored. The room seemed to tilt on its axis as all eyes, including those blazing with fury, fell upon him. His words carried weight beyond their syllables. They spoke of truth, of unseen labor, of moral currency far richer than money or title. For Amelia, the boy's declaration was more than just an interruption. It was a bridge. She saw in Jimmy not pity, not obligation, but a flicker of courage, a recognition of her humanity that transcended wealth, class, and prejudice. In that fragile connection, she found a measure of solace, a fragile thread of hope weaving its way through the tapestry of scorn and outrage surrounding her. The room itself seemed to pause, holding its collective breath as Mrs. Anderson recoiled, momentarily silenced by the undeniable truth in the boy's assertion. Faces hardened by privilege and expectation shifted, some with incredulity, others with begrudging acknowledgement. Yet still, the venom lingered in the air, like a persistent shadow that refused to dissipate entirely. Amelia remained composed, drawing her dignity tightly around her like armor forged in years of silent endurance. As she left the mansion that evening, the city outside felt different, less hostile, more vast, filled with possibilities yet unseen. Her mind wandered to the community she had always served quietly, the children waiting in the library she dreamed of restoring, the families who relied on her care, the neighbors whose struggles she had lightened through patience and resourcefulness. The inheritance, though significant, was not the heart of what had been granted. It was recognition of a life lived with unbroken honesty and a chance to extend the reach of her compassion in ways previously unimaginable. Alone, Amelia allowed herself a moment to reflect on the extraordinary strangeness of fate. A life she had assumed would remain unnoticed had suddenly been illuminated. And yet, in the quiet of her small apartment, she recognized that the true reward lay not in the wealth bestowed upon her, but in the awareness that her quiet act had mattered, that someone, however young, had truly seen her. Jimmy's small yet resolute voice had pierced the cloud of derision, proving that recognition, even in its earliest form, could plant seeds of profound change. That night, as Amelia lay on her modest bed, she contemplated the delicate balance between gratitude and responsibility. Wealth had been offered, but with it came scrutiny, expectation, and even envy. The path forward was unclear, yet the seed of purpose had been watered, ready to grow. Her eyes lingered on the small candle flickering on her bedside table, its light fragile, yet enduring. In that light, Amelia whispered softly, a prayer and a promise intertwined. I will honor what has been given, not for myself, but for those who need it most. My dignity remains mine, and through it, I will make a difference. And somewhere, beyond the mansion walls and the glittering halls, the first threads of change began to weave themselves, a tapestry that would unite disparate lives through empathy, courage, and the quiet power of unyielding human dignity. In the storm of outrage, scandal, and disbelief, Amelia's heart remained steadfast, poised on the edge of transformation, ready to step into a future defined not by wealth alone, but by the resonance of a life lived with uncompromising integrity. The inheritance, which to some might have seemed a gift of liberation, instead became a crucible of fire for Amelia Johnson. News of her sudden wealth spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, bringing with it whispers, jealousy, and opportunists drawn to the promise of fortune. Long-lost relatives materialized as if from the shadows, claiming rights and demanding shares. Each knock on her modest door, each unsolicited visit, reminded Amelia that wealth had a way of magnifying the world's darkest impulses. Yet, through it all, she carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had defined her life long before the inheritance. The Anderson mansion, too, remained a hotbed of resentment. Mrs. Anderson's fury did not abate. If anything, it grew more venomous. She seized every opportunity to confront Amelia, her voice sharp, her eyes blazing with a contempt born of wounded pride and fear of irrelevance. "You're nothing but a thief dressed as a saint," she hissed one morning in front of the staff, her accusation hanging in the air like smoke from cruel fire. Amelia's hands, folded in front of her, trembled for the briefest moment before she straightened her shoulders, holding her gaze steady. Her voice, though quiet, carried the weight of unshakable truth. "You can call me what you want. But what I have, no one can steal, my dignity and my honest work." The words echoed through the room, a ripple of calm in a sea of anger. Some of the staff, who had long watched Amelia endure humiliation without complaint, felt a spark of admiration ignite within them. Others shifted uncomfortably, torn between loyalty to the household and the undeniable courage they were witnessing. Amelia's heart, though heavy with fatigue and a sting of constant scrutiny, remained resolute. She had learned long ago that dignity was not measured by wealth, by recognition, or by public applause. It was forged in quiet endurance and standing firm when the world sought to knock one down. Outside the mansion, in the narrow streets of her neighborhood, the pressure was no less intense. Neighbors and acquaintances whispered behind her back, some envious of her sudden financial security, others uncertain of her intentions. Amelia walked among them with her usual humility, offering help where she could, refusing to let suspicion or envy harden her heart. Each act of generosity, each patient explanation to a curious child or grateful elder, became a testament to her resilience. Though others tried to define her worth through gossip or greed, she remained anchored in the knowledge that her life's value could not be measured by the fleeting judgments of others. Amid this turmoil, young Jimmy Anderson watched from afar. He had begun to understand, in his own small but perceptive way, the depth of Amelia's strength. He saw not a woman overwhelmed by fortune, nor a victim of her family's scorn, but a figure who embodied resilience and integrity. Each time Mrs. Anderson struck with her venomous words, each time relatives or neighbors tried to undermine Amelia's peace, Jimmy's admiration deepened. He witnessed the quiet power it took to meet cruelty with composure, to respond to accusation with calm, and to remain true to one's principles in the face of relentless challenge. One particularly tense afternoon, Mrs. Anderson confronted Amelia in the hallway, her words dripping with malice. "You think a few coins make you better than us. You will never belong here." Amelia felt the familiar heat of humiliation rise, a pressure she had carried for years. But this time, she allowed it to pass over her like water against stone. Kneeling briefly to tie a child's shoelace nearby, she looked up at Mrs. Anderson with eyes clear, steady, and unafraid. "I belong wherever kindness is valued. I belong wherever dignity is honored. And that is more than enough." The statement, though simple, carried a resonance that silenced the room. Even those hardened by privilege and arrogance could not ignore the truth it conveyed. Amelia's strength was not in confrontation or aggression. It was in her unwavering commitment to integrity, in her refusal to let external judgments define her worth. It was a lesson that even the young Jimmy, standing at a discreet distance, absorbed with growing clarity. Power was not measured by money or status, but by the courage to uphold one's principles against every challenge. In the quiet moments that followed, Amelia returned to her modest apartment, the city's evening lights flickering like distant stars outside her window. She sat by the small table where letters, bills, and modest keepsakes from her community lay in careful order. She considered the storm she had weathered, the envy, the accusations, the unexpected weight of wealth, and allowed herself a fleeting sigh, not of defeat, but of acknowledgment of her endurance. Her thoughts drifted to the children she tutored, to the elders she assisted, to the fragile yet vibrant neighborhood that thrived on mutual care and quiet sacrifice. The inheritance, while powerful in its potential, was not the true measure of her life's worth. What mattered was the impact she had, the lives she touched, and the dignity she maintained even when the world attempted to strip it away. Before sleep claimed her, Amelia whispered into the darkness, her voice a mixture of reflection and quiet resolve. "Let them speak. Let them envy. My worth is not in their recognition, but in the lives I have touched and the truth I carry. I will stand, always, with dignity as my shield and compassion as my guide." Outside, in the quiet streets and hidden corners of her neighborhood, life continued in its subtle, resilient rhythm. And somewhere, a young boy who had begun to see the world through her eyes understood, in his own small but profound way, that true strength was not inherited. It was earned, lived, and exemplified in the choices one made when no one was watching. Amelia Johnson had been granted what many would consider freedom, a sudden wealth that could have lifted her from her years of labor into a life of comfort, luxury, and indulgence. Yet, as she stood in the quiet of her modest apartment, listening to the soft murmur of her neighborhood below, the clatter of pots, the laughter of children, the rhythmic shuffle of neighbors' footsteps, she realized that true freedom had little to do with money. The inheritance was not an end in itself, but a tool, a means to amplify the life she had always lived, a life defined by care, connection, and the unyielding pursuit of dignity. The decision came quietly, almost imperceptibly, during a long evening spent reflecting on the potential of her newfound resources. She could have moved into a luxurious apartment, furnished her rooms with elegance, traveled to distant places, and indulged in every desire she had denied herself over the decades. But instead, Amelia envisioned something far greater than comfort. She saw her community transformed, lives uplifted, and hope restored where despair had long taken root. Each image that arose in her mind, the library filled with eager children, families receiving meals, students pursuing dreams they had thought impossible, was vivid, compelling, and deeply human. The following days were a flurry of activity, not for personal gain, but for the betterment of others. Amelia began with the neighborhood's forgotten library, a small crumbling building whose shelves had long been empty and whose walls whispered of neglect. With careful hands, she oversaw repairs, painting faded walls, sanding splintered shelves, and arranging new books that had once seemed out of reach for the children of the community. She walked among the aisles, gently guiding curious hands towards stories of adventure, knowledge, and possibility. The children's eyes sparkled with a hunger she had always known existed but had now found a tangible outlet. Laughter and awe echoed through the formerly silent rooms, and Amelia felt a deep satisfaction swell within her chest, an affirmation that true wealth lay not in gold, but in the nourishment of minds and hearts. Beyond the library, she established scholarships for young students who dared to dream beyond survival, investing in tuition, supplies, and encouragement that would allow them to envision a future larger than their circumstances. Families struggling to feed their children found warm meals awaiting them, not as charity, but as an affirmation of dignity, a reminder that their worth was not defined by scarcity but by humanity. Each act, however small, became a testament to the principle that had guided Amelia throughout her life. Dignity must be nurtured, protected, and extended whenever possible, even when the world sought to undermine it. Some in the community and beyond mocked her decisions, labeling her generosity as foolish, naive, or wasteful. They questioned why someone who had so little ambition for wealth would invest so heavily in the welfare of others. Yet Amelia remained undeterred. She understood that true change required patience, vision, and, above all, unwavering integrity. The choice to prioritize humanity over material gain was not an act of defiance against her critics. It was a continuation of the philosophy that had sustained her through years of invisibility, humiliation, and struggle. Meanwhile, Jimmy Anderson observed her work from a distance, increasingly drawn into the quiet orbit of her influence. He saw how her actions affected the lives around her, and profound respect blossomed within him. This was not charity in its shallowest sense. It was transformation born from wisdom, compassion, and deliberate intention. For Jimmy, the contrast between the hollow indulgence of his previous life and the meaningful impact Amelia fostered was stark and undeniable. He began to speak of her work to his uncle Richard, who, with experience and vision, recognized the rare fire within the young boy's admiration. Slowly, a network of unlikely allies began to form, bridging worlds of wealth and struggle, privilege and perseverance, in the pursuit of a shared vision of hope. Even within the mansion, resistance to Amelia's choice persisted. Mrs. Anderson continued to voice disdain, unable or unwilling to understand that wealth without purpose was empty, that legacy without compassion was hollow. But Amelia paid little heed to scorn. Her satisfaction was found in the quiet joy of others, in children discovering the wonder of reading, in students taking steps toward dreams once deemed impossible, and in families experiencing relief from the daily pressures of survival. With each smile, each word of gratitude, each small transformation, Amelia's conviction strengthened. Dignity, when chosen and nurtured, radiates far beyond the self, touching lives in ways no fortune or status ever could. At night, when the neighborhood quieted and the city lights flickered through her small windows, Amelia allowed herself a rare moment of introspection. The weight of years of labor, sorrow, and endurance seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a profound sense of purpose. Her hands, once calloused and worn from endless service, now carried not only the memories of struggle, but the evidence of change, proof that a single life lived with integrity could ripple outward, affecting countless others. Amelia whispered softly into the night, a mantra that had evolved with her journey. This is not about proving myself to the world. It is about planting seeds where no one else dares to look, nurturing hope where it has long been forgotten, and showing that dignity, once chosen, can create transformation that endures far beyond a lifetime. In choosing dignity over comfort, over recognition, over wealth for its own sake, Amelia had illuminated a path not just for herself, but for an entire community. She had demonstrated that true power lies in resilience, compassion, and moral courage. And in the quiet, flickering glow of her neighborhood, as laughter and learning filled once forgotten streets, she knew with unwavering certainty that she had made the right choice. The roots of change were growing strong, watered by her commitment, and the world, small, humble, and often overlooked, was beginning to bloom anew under her careful stewardship. Curiosity and admiration drew Jimmy Anderson further into Amelia Johnson's world. At first, he approached quietly, almost shyly, as though stepping into her neighborhood required careful negotiation of invisible boundaries he had never faced before. The narrow streets, lined with modest homes, smelled of cooked meals, rain, and human resilience, a stark contrast to the polished, antiseptic corridors of the Anderson mansion. He observed from a distance, watching Amelia move with purpose, tending to small miracles unnoticed by the rest of the city. Every gesture, every act of care, carried a weight that Jimmy, despite his youth, could sense deep in his chest. Amelia's life in the neighborhood was a mosaic of acts of generosity, patience, and unwavering commitment. Clara, the single mother who had long shared simple meals and stories with Amelia, was enrolling in school again, rekindling a dream she had thought lost. Children who once wandered aimlessly now carried books from the library Amelia had repaired, their small faces bright with curiosity and hope. A troubled teenager named Daniel found in Amelia a mentor who never judged him, who saw potential where others saw failure. Each life touched was a thread in a tapestry of resilience and care, and Jimmy could feel, even as an outsider, the warmth radiating from her presence. He began to speak of Amelia's work to his uncle Richard, a man of influence and vision. Richard had always been perceptive, recognizing initiative and integrity where others might overlook them. When Jimmy described the neighborhood, the projects, and the profound impact of Amelia's quiet labor, Richard listened intently. There was a fire in his nephew's voice, a conviction that transcended the simple recounting of events. Richard saw the beginnings of something rare, a young boy recognizing the value of compassion, a community transforming through one person's dedication, and potential to expand that transformation beyond the immediate streets and homes Amelia had touched. An unlikely alliance began to form, built not on wealth or privilege, but on shared humanity and a belief in the power of meaningful action. Amelia, who had once been invisible, found herself considered an equal in discussions about projects, initiatives, and visions for change. Jimmy, standing beside her, was no longer merely a silent observer. He became a voice of advocacy, bridging the gap between worlds that had previously existed in tension and misunderstanding. Together, they envisioned programs that could empower not just the neighborhood but other communities similarly overlooked, fostering a ripple effect of dignity, education, and opportunity. The partnership was not without its challenges. Some in the community, wary of outsiders and uncertain about the motives of the wealthy boy, viewed Jimmy with suspicion. Within the mansion, Mrs. Anderson remained vocal in her disdain, unwilling to accept that her son's admiration for a maid could hold genuine value. Yet Amelia's calm perseverance, her consistent demonstration of integrity, gradually disarmed skepticism. She allowed actions to speak where words might fail, showing through tangible results that her vision was rooted in compassion, not self-interest. One afternoon, Amelia and Jimmy walked together through the library's newly restored shelves. Children clutched books close to their chests, laughing softly, their eyes wide with wonder. Jimmy bent to speak with a young boy struggling to read aloud, encouraging him with patience and a quiet smile. Amelia watched, a mixture of pride and gentle amusement stirring in her chest. This was not mentorship in the formal sense, but a sharing of humanity, a modeling of kindness and encouragement that transcended age and circumstance. The bond between the two deepened, defined by mutual respect rather than hierarchy, and by recognition of the transformative power inherent in small, intentional acts. The neighborhood responded. Families began to rely on one another in ways that had seemed improbable before Amelia's influence had grown. Adults who had once isolated themselves found opportunities to participate, teach, and contribute. Children became ambassadors of hope, sharing lessons learned from reading and small community projects. Amelia's vision, bolstered by Jimmy's insight and advocacy, began to take tangible shape, creating a network of empowerment that stretched beyond the immediate streets. Even as momentum built, the young boy faced his own internal challenges. He had been raised in a world of wealth, accustomed to control and expectation, yet now he found himself learning from someone society had deemed invisible. His humility, initially hesitant, evolved into a quiet confidence, a realization that true leadership and influence are not derived from titles or fortune, but from integrity, empathy, and a willingness to act courageously on behalf of others. Jimmy began to see the power of choice, He could perpetuate the shallow values he inherited, or he could stand beside Amelia and witness the creation of something enduring. Their alliance also became a lesson in patience, resilience, and the often subtle ways in which change occurs. The projects grew incrementally, each success building on the last, and every setback offering a chance to refine strategy, deepen understanding, and strengthen bonds. Amelia, who had endured a lifetime of invisibility, was now a visible force for transformation, yet she remained grounded, her motivation never shifting from the care of others and the fostering of dignity in every interaction. By the end of the chapter, the invisible threads of connection had begun to weave a new reality. Amelia's influence, combined with Jimmy's support, promised a bridge between worlds previously divided by wealth, privilege, and societal expectations. Allies were forming, hope was growing, and the once solitary Maid was now at the center of a network of change that held the potential to extend far beyond the limits of her neighborhood. In every smile, every act of learning, every gesture of trust, the proof of their shared mission shimmered, an affirmation that dignity, courage, and human connection could unite lives in ways money and status never could. The polished boardroom of Anderson Enterprises, gleaming with glass, steel, and authority, had never seemed so intimidating to Amelia Johnson. She stood near the back, her posture straight, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, acutely aware of the eyes upon her. Executives and stakeholders, accustomed to discussing mergers, profits, and power, now turned their attention towards someone they had long considered invisible, a maid, a woman whose life had unfolded in quiet anonymity, suddenly thrust into the spotlight. Whispers rippled through the room, ranging from skepticism to ridicule. "Why is she here? What authority does she have?" murmured one, while others exchanged glances laden with disbelief and subtle disdain. Amelia felt the familiar tug of nerves, the echo of years spent silently laboring in the shadow of wealth, but she drew upon the deep reservoir of strength she had cultivated over decades. Every hardship endured, every slight absorbed, every moment of invisibility had honed her for this moment. She remembered the faces of the children in her neighborhood, the gratitude in Clara's eyes, the tentative trust of Daniel, and the admiration of Jimmy, who now stood quietly at her side. Their collective hope, fragile yet potent, lent her courage. Richard, observing from the head of the table, gave her an encouraging nod, signaling that it was her time to speak. Taking a steadying breath, Amelia stepped forward, her voice low but imbued with conviction. "All my life, I was invisible. Humiliated, dismissed, buried under judgment, overlooked in every space meant to celebrate worth. But you forgot something. Seeds buried in the dark rise to the light. Dignity, compassion, and integrity, these are not measured by status or wealth, but by the lives they touch." A hush fell over the boardroom. Even those hardened by ambition and accustomed to asserting power over others felt the subtle yet undeniable truth in her words. Amelia continued, describing the impact of the community projects she had initiated, the library restored, the scholarships granted, and the small miracles of education, care, and opportunity that now filled once forgotten streets. Her descriptions were not boastful. They were factual, precise, and laced with a quiet passion that could not be ignored. She paused, scanning the room, her eyes briefly meeting Jimmy's. In that look, a silent affirmation passed between them, acknowledgement of shared purpose, recognition of courage born not from entitlement but from action. Amelia's words carried a rhythm, a cadence born from lived experience rather than theory, and gradually the room's tension shifted. The skepticism and snide remarks faltered in the face of tangible outcomes, in the undeniable proof that her vision had transformed lives. Mrs. Anderson, predictably, voiced her objections, her tone sharp and insistent. "She is just a maid. What authority does she have here?" Her words, meant to diminish and discredit, instead reveal the narrowness of her perception. Amelia's response was measured, unwavering. Authority is not granted by title or wealth alone. It is earned through action, through integrity, and through service that changes lives. My work is a testament to this truth, and the impact is visible, measurable, and lasting. The boardroom shifted from incredulity to a cautious acknowledgement. Some executives nodded subtly, others frowned, trying to reconcile the challenge to their assumptions. Richard, smiling faintly, allowed the room to absorb the weight of Amelia's presence and words. Slowly, respect began to replace skepticism, the kind that is hard-won, not demanded. Outside the corporate walls, the community continued to flourish. The library echoed with laughter and curiosity. Children huddled over books, discovering worlds previously inaccessible. Families leaned on one another with renewed confidence, strengthened by the resources and guidance Amelia had fostered. Her influence, once confined to quiet streets and overlooked homes, now rippled into larger systems, shaping perceptions and opportunities alike. Jimmy, observing from the edges of these developments, felt a transformation within himself. He had begun the journey as a boy curious about kindness, witnessing acts of courage and integrity that contrasted sharply with the world he had known. Now he saw that leadership could exist outside the constraints of privilege, that true power lay not in wealth or control, but in fostering change that uplifted others. The bond between him and Amelia deepened, rooted in shared purpose, mutual respect, and recognition of the profound lessons of dignity, resilience, and empathy she embodied. For Amelia, the journey had not been about recognition or wealth. It was about the quiet victories, the seeds sown in neglected corners, and the lives transformed by care and compassion. Standing in that boardroom, seeing once invisible outcomes celebrated and validated, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The past humiliations, the struggles, the relentless invisibility, all had led her here, to a place where her voice, once silent, now carried weight, authority, and resonance. She concluded her presentation with a simple but piercing statement. Wealth can build walls, or it can build bridges. I have chosen bridges. Dignity, integrity, and compassion are the pillars on which true transformation stands. Let us use our resources not to elevate ourselves above others, but to lift others toward their own potential. The world becomes better when we choose this path together. As Amelia stepped back, the room erupted, not in applause alone, but in recognition of the undeniable truth she had conveyed. Even those who had doubted, scorned, or dismissed her could not ignore the evidence of her impact. The maid who had been buried under scorn, humiliation, and invisibility had risen, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a living testament to the transformative power of dignity, courage, and selfless action. In that moment, Amelia's presence in the boardroom, her voice resonating beyond the walls of privilege, signaled a shift not just in perception, but in the trajectory of lives, communities, and hearts. She had risen from the ashes of invisibility into a force of change, bridging worlds, inspiring allies, and showing that even the quietest voices, when guided by integrity and compassion, can echo loudly enough to transform the world. The neighborhood that had once echoed with quiet despair now thrummed with life, hope, and resilience. Amelia Johnson walked through the streets she had long considered her domain, observing the subtle, tangible effects of her years of dedication. Children dashed past her, books clutched tightly to their chests, their laughter ringing like music through the narrow alleys. Families gathered around modest tables in small homes, sharing meals that had become consistent, nourishing, and, above all, a symbol of the care that now permeated the community. Each sight, each sound, was a testament to the profound transformation taking place, not in wealth or power, but in spirit, dignity, and human connection. Amelia's work had become a living blueprint for change. The library, once a crumbling building of neglect, now overflowed with books, curiosity, and quiet discovery. Students who had never dreamed of education beyond mere survival were now thriving, encouraged not only by resources but by the personal attention, patience, and guidance Amelia provided. Scholarships extended to local youth opened doors previously imagined as locked forever. Even teenagers like Daniel, once troubled and directionless, began to find purpose, mentorship, and a sense of belonging. Each life touched by Amelia became a ripple in an ever-expanding wave of hope. Jimmy Anderson had become an active participant in this transformation. No longer the timid observer of Chapter 1, he now moved with purpose alongside Amelia, learning lessons that transcended traditional education. He saw firsthand the impact of integrity, empathy, and consistent effort. He witnessed the power of listening, of acting selflessly, and of nurturing others without expectation of reward. His admiration for Amelia had grown into a profound respect, tempered by humility and awareness of his own privilege. He began to understand that true leadership was not inherited, but chosen, exercised through service, and measured by positive impact. Their bond, though unconventional, was deeply rooted in shared purpose and mutual trust. Amelia saw in Jimmy a spark of potential, a young man capable of bridging worlds, of influencing both the powerful and the overlooked. Jimmy saw in Amelia a mentor, a guide, and a living example of the principles he had only begun to comprehend. Together, they cultivated programs, educational initiatives, and social projects that extended far beyond the confines of the neighborhood, reaching children, families, and individuals who had previously been invisible to those with influence and means. Resistance still existed, though it had lessened over time. Some in the wider community, wary of change or jealous of the attention Amelia garnered, attempted to undermine her efforts. Within the mansion, Mrs. Anderson continued to cast judgment. Though her criticisms no longer carry the same weight, Amelia's results, visible and undeniable, could not be silenced. Each challenge became an opportunity to reinforce her philosophy. Dignity, compassion, and integrity are not temporary traits, but enduring forces capable of reshaping lives when exercised consistently. Amelia's transformation extended beyond her community work. She herself had changed, emerging from years of invisibility into a figure whose presence commanded respect, not through wealth or status, but through moral authority and the tangible outcomes of her actions. Her resilience, once forged in the private chambers of endurance and silent labor, now shone in public spaces, inspiring others to act courageously and with kindness. Neighbors, initially hesitant or skeptical, now approached her for guidance, sharing ideas and participating actively in projects. Volunteers emerged, driven by her example, each adding their own energy and commitment to the collective effort. In quiet moments, Amelia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The humiliation of the Anderson mansion, the whispers of envious neighbors, the relentless demands of survival, all had prepared her for this moment of genuine impact. She had learned that transformation is not instantaneous. It requires patience, vision, and unwavering adherence to values. The results she now witnessed, the restored library, the empowered youth, the renewed sense of community, were the fruits of persistence, compassion, and unshakable dignity. Jimmy, observing her interactions, began to internalize these lessons in profound ways. He recognized that influence without integrity is hollow, that wealth without compassion is empty, and that true change is rarely dramatic. It is incremental, built through countless small decisions to act with fairness, care, and moral courage. He also saw that Amelia's success was not her own alone. It was a shared triumph, the product of collaboration, mentorship, and the trust she had inspired in others. By the chapter's end, the neighborhood itself had been irrevocably altered. Streets once silent with despair now buzzed with laughter, conversation, and purposeful activity. Families leaned on each other, supporting, teaching, and celebrating successes. Children carried books home, hungry to read and explore new worlds. Teenagers who had once wandered aimlessly discovered direction and hope. Adults, inspired by Amelia's example, engaged in acts of kindness and investment in their neighbors. The entire community had become a living testament to what sustained effort, guided by compassion and dignity, could achieve. In these quiet triumphs, Amelia and Jimmy found affirmation. Their bond, strengthened by shared vision and mutual respect, had become a beacon for the community. They had demonstrated that transformation does not require fame or fortune, only consistent, intentional action rooted in empathy and moral courage. And as the sun set over the now vibrant streets, the laughter of children, the warmth of shared meals, and the quiet pride in the eyes of parents reflected the profound truth that true transformation begins with dignity, flourishes through compassion, and endures when humanity is placed at the center of all action. Under the warm glow of a golden sunset, Amelia Johnson stood before the renovated library, her heart swelling with a mix of exhaustion, gratitude, and profound fulfillment. Around her, children gathered, clutching books with wide-eyed curiosity, their laughter filling the air like music. Some stumbled over words, others whispered their discoveries to friends, but each face radiated hope and possibility. Amelia watched them with tears shimmering in her eyes, a reflection of the journey that had brought her here, from invisible maid to a living symbol of dignity and resilience. Beside her stood Jimmy Anderson, no longer the timid boy hiding in the corner of the mansion, but a young man whose character had been shaped by compassion, observation, and courage. He did not seek the spotlight. Instead, he offered quiet support, respecting Amelia's place at the center. Their connection was unspoken but profound, a shared understanding that transformation is not achieved alone, but through commitment, integrity, and the nurturing of others' potential. Jimmy's eyes, filled with admiration, reflected his own journey of awakening and growth. Amelia's gaze swept over the streets that had once echoed with despair. She saw families gathered around simple meals, neighbors helping one another with genuine care, and teenagers pursuing dreams that had once seemed impossible. Every book on the shelves, every scholarship awarded, every smile of encouragement was a seed planted, now flowering into tangible change. She realized that her life's purpose had never been about wealth, recognition, or power. It had always been about showing that dignity, when upheld and nurtured, can ignite hope and transform generations. Kneeling to help a young girl untangle the pages of a particularly worn book, Amelia whispered softly, "The world sees what we allow it to see. Never let anyone steal your hope, your curiosity, or your dignity. Even in the darkest corners, light can grow." Her words, though quiet, carried the weight of decades of perseverance, struggle, and unwavering moral courage. Around her, the community absorbed the lesson without realizing. They had witnessed it daily, in her actions, in her consistent care, in her refusal to be diminished by scorn or circumstance. Jimmy leaned closer, speaking gently. "You show me what it means to truly see people, to stand for them without expectation. I hope I can carry that forward, just like you do." Amelia smiled, a mix of pride and affection in her expression. She knew that her work would outlast her presence, that the principles she had lived by, dignity, compassion, courage, would ripple outward through those she had touched, inspiring countless others in ways she might never witness. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows and a golden hue over the streets, Amelia whispered into the wind, "It was never about the fortune. It was about the choices we make, the lives we touch, and the dignity we uphold. From ashes, we can rise, stronger, brighter, and unbroken." She looked at Jimmy, at the children, at the neighbors who now laughed, learned, and dreamed freely, and felt an unshakable certainty. She had risen like a phoenix from years of invisibility and hardship, transforming not only her own life but the lives of countless others. And to everyone witnessing this story, Amelia's journey offers a quiet reminder. Dignity, courage, and compassion are powerful tools. They can spark change, heal wounds, and illuminate even the darkest paths. If this story has touched your heart, inspired your mind, or reminded you of the power of resilience and hope, don't forget to follow the channel. Together, we can share more stories that uplift, inspire, and remind us all that every life, no matter how small or overlooked, has the power to shine brightly.